The Gophers' hit rate when it comes to transfers has been sky high with PJ Fleck. Who will be the impact transfers of 2024?
You are Locked On Golden Gophers, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up? What up? You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Now, in the off season, we've been a little slower. We're trying to do 3 shows a week, but it's been hit or miss. But I have great news for the loyal fans, the everydayers, and what have you. The Gopher fans uniting today. We are going back to 5 days a week. Starting next week, we're back. Football season will be here before you know it. Practices will be going in the very near future, and we got you covered with daily Gophers content starting next week. So be sure to hit subscribe. Be sure to follow wherever you get your podcast at Locked On Golden Gophers. Next week, we're going to kick off our breaking down of every single opponent on the Gophers our schedule this year. We're going to get into the transfers that have happened, the coaching changes, the key players to know for each and every single Gophers opponent out there. So you definitely want to hit subscribe so you don't miss all of that information coming your way. After we get through the opponent series, we're going to move on to the Gophers themselves, breaking down the position groups room by room and also ranking the position groups across the entire Big Ten. You're not going to want to miss any of that. We will have every ounce of information you need to know for your Gophers 2024 season here at Locked On Golden Gophers. So be sure to hit subscribe. Be sure to tell other Gophers fans about the podcast so we can keep on growing this thing and have some great times. Live shows after the games this season, just like last year with Ron Johnson and co. So we're definitely gonna get it done. Now, let's talk about today's show, where we're going to talk about where the Gophers finished in the Big Ten preseason polls. Is it respectful? Is it where you would expect, or is it a little bit disrespectful? We're going to talk about that. Then we're going to move into the impact transfers. Now, Coach Fleck has had a great time finding rotational players and starters in the transfer portal in all of the years that he's gone to the portal, and this year probably will not be an exception to that. I am looking forward to it. We're going to talk about who we think will be those impact players in 2024. And then finally, we got to talk about Dawson Garcia. He came down with an injury. How serious is it? We'll dive into that all today. Now, let's kick it off with the Gophers in that preseason Big Ten poll, officially done by Cleveland.com, as it typically is. And this year, the Gophers finished 12th in the preseason poll for the new, bigger Big Ten. So 18 teams, the Gophers are put at the 12th position. Now, it seems a little bit low for my liking. Now, you could say I'm a homer, you could say I'm biased, but when I'm looking at the returning production, I'm looking at the potential, I'm looking at the upside of the players, I do think that the Gophers should be more in that 8 to 10 range. I think that's more likely where they could finish on the season, but 12 isn't too far of a stretch outside of that. So I guess it makes a little sense, especially for when your Gophers are typically not given the benefit of the doubt. They're not usually given that extra love for being a helmet school of sorts. They're usually going to be a little bit more underrated than they are given the benefit of the doubt, like in Iowa, like a Wisconsin, like a Nebraska even. So it's a little sickening, but we see it each and every single offseason, so it's not surprising. But the Gophers come in at 12th. I guess it could have been worse, but like I said, 8 to 10 is more of a realistic range, in my opinion, because of the returning production, because of the schedule, and because of the upside. Now, the media poll finished as following. Number 1, Ohio State. They had 21 first place votes, and the only other team to get a first place vote was the number 2 school of Oregon with 6 first place votes. Now, beyond that, we had Penn State at 3, Michigan at 4. Now, those top 4 schools, you'll probably get that from everybody, yourself included. If you're listening to the show, you will probably have Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan in your top 4 in some sort of order. Maybe not in that order, but in some shape or form, those are the top 4, and it's not too surprising. Now, beyond that, you've got Iowa at 5, USC at 6, Wisconsin at 7, Nebraska at 8, Rutgers at 9, Washington at 10, Maryland at 11. Then Minnesota comes in at 12. After Minnesota, you have Illinois at 13, Northwestern at 14, UCLA at 15, Michigan State at 16, Indiana at 17, and Purdue at 18, finishing at the bottom of the Big Ten. Now, looking at this, I do not believe that Maryland has any business being in front of Minnesota, plain and simple. Now, that could be maybe some Gopher fandom coming out, but if you think about it, they have a less experienced quarterback. They have a ton of departures that headed off to the NFL or to graduation or what have you. They have a lot of impact players that departed, and that Maryland team was a team that was up and down like the Gophers. Now, they finished with a better record, but they still lost to, I believe, Illinois, Northwestern. Those were games that Maryland, if they were really truly a better team than Minnesota, they probably would have handled business as well. Now, Minnesota has had some issues with that flippy floppiness, up and downness as well against teams that they should take care of business against. So they are in a similar tier, but I don't think Maryland has as much returning production coming back. They don't have as much youth upside coming back that is stepping into a bigger role or a more opportune role. And that's where the biggest difference is between Maryland and the Gophers, in my opinion. So the Gophers should definitely be in front of them, if you ask me. I also believe there's a case for Minnesota to be over one of, or all of, or two of, what have you, of Washington, Rutgers, and Nebraska. Now, I can see the upside cases for a lot of these schools. Rutgers is coming off of one of their best seasons, but is that the truth, or was that the anomaly year? That's the biggest question for me. I could see other teams putting it to rest after the season and Rutgers goes back to 6-6 or 7-5 or something like that. So I am not all in on the Rutgers hype train right now. Washington has so many departures. You're talking about they have an awesome transfer QB coming in. Yes, Will Rogers has a ton of production, but they also are decimated at the offensive line, decimated at the wide receiver position, decimated on the defense with a ton of players going to the NFL. Also, their head coach is completely new. So I think if you look at what Jed Fish did with Arizona, you look at his first season, he won 1 game. You look at his second season, I believe he had won 5 games. It took him 3 years to really get that program going. So if you're looking at it as a whole, I think Washington is going to take some time to truly get there. So Washington, I think, could be behind Minnesota. Rutgers could be behind Minnesota. I do believe in Nebraska, though. I can't believe I'm saying that. I can't believe I'm putting those words out there, but I really like Coach Matt Rule. I really love their defensive coordinator, Tony White, and I think a second year into the system, a second year with players returning, Gifford's coming back. I believe Ty Robinson's back. They have a lot of quality players. They have a high-flying defense, and now they have some confidence, some momentum, and I think they will at least get to a bowl game this year. I could see them getting 7 or 8 wins on the season, and you know what? Nebraska could be on its way back. So as much as I don't love saying that, also shout out to all the loyal Nebraska fans out there that have been through the mud and back with that team. Now, overall, I think the Gophers could be rated again in front of 2, all 3, or maybe at least one of those schools along with Maryland. That would put them in the top 10, and I think that's more of where they are fitting when it comes to this polling. Now, I personally wouldn't have USC at 6 either. I think Wisconsin should be in front of them for sure. I don't even know if I would have them necessarily 100% in front of your Nebraska, your Gophers, your what have you. Now, I can see why people are giving Lincoln Riley the benefit of the doubt, but I wouldn't be surprised if USC started the season 1-3 or 1-4 to start the season. I think they could have some troubles transitioning to the Big Ten, just like UCLA, just like potentially Washington with all their changes. I think the only one that looks ready to immediately transition to the Big Ten is Oregon. So when you're looking at this whole thing, I think that this will be a very interesting poll to look at the end of the year, because I think it could finish a lot different than what they have projected. Now, overall, it could be a lot worse for the Gophers. It could have been more towards the bottom. They could have put us towards 15th or something like that. So overall, 12th. You know what? You live with it. Based on FanDuel's adjusted win totals, Minnesota is projected in the 11-14 range. I don't see Rutgers on the list, but otherwise there are 10 teams in front of the Gophers, 2 other teams that share the same odds as the Gophers, and then 4 teams below them. I grouped Rutgers into the same group as them, so 11-14 range according to FanDuel. Now, Ohio State, Oregon in their own tier, that makes sense. Penn State is right there on the cusp of that similar tier, and I think their schedule could put them into that tier, the only tough school really being Ohio State on Penn State's schedule, so they could find themselves in that Big Ten championship. Now, Michigan is right below those 3 in my eyes. I think they're still a high-quality team. They have one of the best defenses in the country. I think they'll find a way to get it done. We'll just see how stable that O-line is and if it can carry the load on top of who will be playing quarterback, but those four are far and away the best of the Big Ten. Now, the next tier by many is Wisconsin, Iowa, and USC. Now, I don't necessarily think Wisconsin or USC has done enough as of late to really put themselves up there in a lone tier with that, but you know what? I'm going to let that be. I digress. I will let it be. So that's tier 2. From there, I could see a case for any of the following schools being in that next grouping of tier 3. Washington, Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Maryland. All 5 of those schools, I think, have a case to be in that tier 3 conversation. I would personally have Nebraska and Minnesota towards the top of that tier, more towards getting towards that tier 3. But overall, I think that is a competitive tier in there. And then you move to a tier 4, I think you have sleepers that are still likely building, but could show signs of life, could show some upsets this year, like in Indiana, Northwestern, Michigan State, and Illinois. And then at the bottom of the Big Ten, I have UCLA and Purdue. That is where I'm at right now. So that likely puts Minnesota anywhere from 8 to 12 range within the conference. But with a rock star season, I could see Minnesota finishing as high as 6th in the Big Ten. And with another brutal season, I could see their floor being anywhere to 15th. So what that should tell Gophers fans is that Minnesota is going to be extremely overlooked because they are one of the biggest wild cards, one of the biggest question marks, mysteries in the Big Ten Conference. Now, don't expect any benefit of the doubt when it comes to the Gophers, but hopefully that makes the potential Cinderella season that much sweeter for Minnesota. Now, what are your thoughts of the Gophers rankings in the Big Ten polls? Let me know in the comments below over on YouTube. Football season is almost here, and again, we're back to 5 days a week starting next week, where we will kick off with our opponent breakdown. So be sure to subscribe. You don't want to miss that going forward. And if you know other Gophers fans who aren't locked in with Locked On in the podcast, be sure to tag them and share it their way. But next, we're going to talk about impact transfers because PJ Fleck has a ridiculous hit rate with transfers right now. We're going to talk about who could be impact players starting this season coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about our friends over at Gametime, because Gametime is the place to be when it's coming to finding tickets to events, whether that be sporting events, whether that be concerts, theater shows, comedy shows, you name it, they've got you covered. And they're also an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And on top of that, prices on Gametime actually go down the closer you get to the first pitch. So with killer last minute deals and the option to look at all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So definitely go and check it out. Go give them a look. Now, I know I am going to be using Gametime a heck of a lot next year. I've already got the Celtics Timberwolves game on my list to get to. I'm probably going to try to use it on some Lynx tickets here in the future and so much more. So you're definitely going to want to join me over at Gametime. Download Gametime, create an account, and use promo code Locked On College. That's LOCKEDON College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, download the app Gametime, and use promo code Locked On College for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Gophers fans, let's talk about impact transfers. Let's talk about the hit rates Coach Fleck has had and who could be next on that hit rate list. Now, Minnesota has 12 transfer portal commits ready to row in 2024. Now, it isn't likely that all of them will play a role in the next season. That being said, Minnesota has been known to have some major impact players with each of their transfer classes when PJ Fleck gets active. Now, 2020, 2018, and 2017, PJ Fleck didn't really take any transfers, but all of the other years he has, and he has had some great success. Now, the impact players from those years include the following. 2023, he had Trayvon Jones, who was a starter, an impact player for Minnesota. Jack Henderson was a full-time starter and an impact player. Corey Crooms was a starter and impact player. Elijah Spencer was a starter later on in the season. Ryan Seelig was a rotational player. Sean Tyler was a brief starter. They had a big role for him, but he didn't really live up to the potential, so he ended up being replaced, but he did have a rotational role. Chris Collins was a rotational player, and Tyler Bride was a rotational player. Now, of 11 transfers coming in, that's 8 players that made an impact at a rotational or a starter level for the Gophers. And one of those players not in that 8 is Craig McDonald, who still is a to be determined and could have high upside for the Gophers moving forward. Now you go to 2022, you're looking at Kyler Baugh, 2-year starter, Quinn Carroll, a 3-year starter, Chuck Filiaga, a starter for a year. Beanie Bishop was a starter for a year before he transferred again and became an all Big 12 player. Ryan Stapp was a rotational player. Darnell Jeffries was a rotational player. That's 6 of the 8 transfers that Minnesota brought in were impact players of a rotational or a starter level, and a few of those were multi-year starters. Then you go to 2021, you had Jack Gibbons, who was a starter, Niles Pinckney, who was a starter, Matthew Trickett was a starter, Dalen Wright was a starter, and Carter Shaw saw rotational opportunities in his time with the Gophers. That's 5 out of 7 impactful players of a rotational starter level. You can see the consistency here, the hit rate here. PJ Fleck has been killing it when it comes to the transfer portal. 2019, we have Benjamin St. Juste as a starter, Micah Dutredway as a starter. Those 2 players were 2 of 3 players to be transfers for Minnesota, and both had huge impacts. And then that is, if you look across all of those different transfer classes, that is 29 transfer players of some capacity, and we hit on 21. I listed 21 players right there, and 21 out of 29 hitting in some capacity is amazing. That's 72% hit rate. That is crazy, but it goes to show you that this coaching staff knows what they're looking for from the transfer portal. So looking across at this year's transfer class, you have 12 transfers. That means about 7 or 8 of them hit if you hit at that 72% hit rate. And so 7 or 8 of them should have a rotational or starter level play of some capacity. That could be huge for the Gophers moving forward. Now, my best guess at who could be the impactful transfers, of course, number 1, Max Brosmer. He's a 4-star transfer according to 247, but he's going to be the Gophers starting quarterback. He's obviously going to be a starter level player. He's going to be an impact player, and hopefully he can clean up the Gophers passing game and give us some more success on the offensive front and hopefully more success in the win columns. I am very excited for Max Brosmer to play this upcoming season. I think he's going to shock a lot of folks outside of Dinkytown. Now, another player I think could be a huge impact player for the Gophers both this year, but definitely moving forward, could be a multi-year starter type guy, is Jackson Howard. He is in his redshirt freshman year this year. He is initially from Minnesota, transferred in from LSU, 4-star transfer type player. Jackson Howard definitely has the upside to be a big-time guy for the Gophers. Then you've got another 4-star transfer coming in, a wide receiver from Georgia, Tyler Williams. I think he could make his way into the rotation this year and then be a number 1 receiver, a number 2 receiver in that grouping for Minnesota next year. So those 3 are at the top of my list: Max Brosmer, Jackson Howard, and Tyler Williams. Now, another player on the verge of a 4-star transfer, according to 247, is C.A. Bangura. I think C.A. Bangura is going to be the running back 2 for the Minnesota Golden Gophers moving forward. I've heard great things coming out of camp. I saw great things in the spring, and I think they're going to use his versatility. He can be used on the ground. He can be used in the passing game. So I think C.A. Bangura is going to have a big role for the Gophers behind Darius Taylor. Now, beyond that, you've got Ethan Robinson. He is looking to step into that Trayvon Jones role, be the starting cornerback opposite of Justin Wally. I think he's going to be big time. And then Giante McMillan, you haven't heard a lot of him probably, but he was getting some really good rotational reps at the safety in the nickel position. He comes from TCU. I think he's a guy who could be a jack of all trades for this Gophers team. I think they really want to use him. They like his speed. They like his versatility. And I think he will find a way into the rotation of the defensive backs. Those are 6 players that we could see at a starter or heavy rotational level snaps starting in 2024. Now, those 6 players could see, like I said, big time minutes, but beyond them, you have Aluma Kelly, you have Adam Kasai, you have Christian Driver, all are younger players that I could see making a case for a rotation spot this upcoming year, but their playing time could really take off in 2025. And then finally, the other transfers to talk about: Dylan Whitkey. He's a quarterback. He probably won't see the field this year, but he is a depth guy for Minnesota. Then you've got Jaron Mangingham and you've got Marcus Major, both running backs. Both could maybe find roles with the Gophers, but they won't be the 1 or the 2. So again, all those 5 or so players, 6 or so players I just listed, maybe not the huge impacts, but down the line could have further impact. Now, next, to close up the show, we're going to talk about Dawson Garcia and an injury that just hit him. How long could it take and how serious is it? We're talking about that next. All right, Gophers fans, last but certainly not least, we have to talk about the men's basketball team because Dawson Garcia, the star of the team, the all Big Ten level player for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, was injured this offseason. Now, my guy Jeff Wald broke the news. Dawson Garcia had a left foot injury, which required surgery and will have about a 4 to 5 week timeline. Now, will that be the end of it? Will he be ready to go right after that? That's hopeful. There's no reason to panic quite yet, as he said that he is going to be coming back in that September-ish timeframe. But at the same time, it is extremely unfortunate that he is basically the Gophers star player, their number one player, and all Big Ten level player, who was second team by the media and third team by the coaches, I believe, last year. He can't put in that extra time. He can't put in that summertime grind to continue to elevate and advance his game. That is going to come to a halt while he has to work on rehabbing and getting back to form once his recovery window has cleared. Now, how long will it take for him to get back into playing shape, get back up to 100% speed, 100% comfortability? Those are the big questions that await this Gophers team with Dawson Garcia on the mend. Now, is there any potential of this being a lingering issue into the season? Is there any potential for re-injury? Those are questions that come up. There hasn't been a lot of details on what the specific injury was. We just know he had to get a cleanup surgery in order to take care of it. So hopefully it's not anything long-term. Hopefully it isn't something that could linger or anything like that, because this is Dawson Garcia's final year of eligibility, and he came like a man on a mission, ready to really try and set a huge standard for himself. He has talked about, he has put it out there into the ether from the media that he wants to be, and he has all-American aspirations. He has Big Ten Player of the Year aspirations, and in order to reach that level, he's going to need to be his peak form, his best form, the best basketball player he can be. And it's hard when you have to take a step back in the offseason and can't keep on grinding. Then you have to work yourself back into consistent shape, back into 100% reliability, comfortability with the foot and what have you. So it's a little bit discouraging to kick off for the Gophers, but it isn't anything to panic about. Now, on a team with like 11 seniors, you have a lot of experience across the board, but it's super unfortunate because it maybe puts Minnesota slightly behind the 8 ball when it comes to preparing, creating chemistry, getting the flow of the system with their star player at the helm. That will be maybe a little bit behind in the process. Now, also, if you know Dawson Garcia, you know that Dawson Garcia is probably more upset than anybody that this happened. He's more upset than Ben Johnson. He's more upset than you, than me, than any other fan out there, than any teammates. He is going to be the most upset by this because he is a guy who is a grinder. He's a guy who wants to get out there and be the best he can be. He wants to put the M on his chest. He wants to show up for this school and show you can do it anywhere. He wants to be the face of Minnesota basketball. Now, that being said, that is a positive thing as well. He is a grinder. He is going to get out there and do every single possible thing that he can do, anything within his power to ensure that he is good to go for late October when the season kicks off. He is going to do all of that and then some. And on top of that, he has seen his right-hand man, Parker Fox, go through 2 grueling ACL recoveries in that rehab process. So he knows that the ability to come back stronger is more than possible. He knows what it takes. He has resources. He has a great training team, a great rehabilitation team to make sure he is back at his best form and then some well before we hit Big Ten play, but hopefully before we hit the actual season. Now, this is a player who, like I said, he has put it out there. He wants to be an All-American. He wants to be a Big Ten Player of the Year. He can get it done, and I am excited to see him bounce back. In the end, Minnesota should be fine, but the setback is unfortunate to say the least. And that's going to do it for us here at Locked On Golden Gophers. Be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube. Be sure to follow wherever you get your podcast. Like I said, we are back to 5 days a week starting next week. And until then, I will see you once or twice more this week as well to talk a little bit more Golden Gophers football. Big Ten Media Days is happening. The Gophers are talking tomorrow. So we'll be sure to get a show out either tomorrow or Friday for you covering the Big Ten Media Days. I will see you then. Roll the boat, Sky, go Gophers as always. And please, please don't forget to hit subscribe.